If I was in New York City and I pulled out my mobile game, showed you my level 900 powerful character, chances are you'll call me a loser. If I did that in China, chances are you might call me a boss. Actually, it's more like the chance of you calling me a cool guy is higher because more people play video games in China. This is Fantasy Westward Journey, a 25-year-old game. Yet some players in China spend up to millions of dollars to keep their accounts competitive.
第一名，150级无级别愤怒加凝神诀腰带，成交价1200万，全服最贵，1200万是什么概念呢？等于北京3环一套房的首付了啊！我们玩的是游戏，土豪玩的是房地产。
And there was even a case of money laundering by Chinese officials using this game. And this is a player in another old game called Legend of Mir 2. The player 8L spent tens of millions of dollars so that he could 1 versus 200 players in this game. Keep in mind, this was 2003. Welcome to Unclassified China, where we deep dive on issues in China. And today's topic is China's crazy microtransaction culture. Now, you might hear that someone dropped $40,000 in a video game called Where Winds Meet so that everybody can ride on this magical boat. And you might think that this guy is crazy. Why would you ever drop 40 racks on a video game? Or somebody in Japan dropped 70,000 USD worth on a mobile game. It sounds outrageous. But let me tell you, these are rookie numbers. A Chinese streamer named Ghost Uncle dropped a whopping 2.6 million USD, equivalent to around 18 million yuan, on a mobile game called Naruto Mobile.
是哪个托？他能托1810万的？
It's a Chinese exclusive mobile game. And that game generated 22 million USD in revenue last month from China alone. All right, so 18 million yuan on a single game. It takes a regular Chinese employee 100 plus years to not even earn that much money. Ghost Uncle, according to some sources, is likely the son of a real estate developer in a county, not even a city level in China. And that's enough for him to afford this lifestyle. Obviously, he streams and he makes money that way too, but that was just from a single game. He has since moved on to playing other gacha games as well. Now, gaming in China, like much of its society, is super competitive. Yeah, even in the money-sinking black holes of these mobile games, Chinese gamers want to be the highest-ranking player, whether that's with higher numbers of how they do damage or how many levels there are or what items are the most precious and unique and rare. Whatever the case to measure their power level is, they want to be number one. And for many rich CCP officials' kids, rich princelings, third-generation red CCP family members, young kids just in general who have access to money, instead of maybe buying a car, another Ferrari, they could drop 400, 500,000 yuan in a video game, flexing statistics as a great way to show off to the peasants. In fact, some of the old video games still being played, very popular in China today, even in the streaming industry, like Fantasy Westward Journey, so popular with millions of yuan literally being poured into the game as we speak. A player in China spent over 10 million yuan on a single account in this particular game, and that's around 1.4 million USD. And in terms of game items, some can go to as much as 130,000 yuan, 450,000 yuan, or even 2 million yuan for a single item. Now, you might be thinking, is this some sort of like a digital cryptocurrency situation, or is it like an NFT? It's actually not. Like, in most cases, these things don't really matter because they have no values, except to the people who are heavily invested into the game. And the purpose of this, well, in general, let's use the term that kids use nowadays, to mog you on item levels and power levels. So you could say that Chinese gaming is like power maxing or game maxing or item level maxing, mogging everybody else, right? The analogy used in China to describe this phenomenon in terms of how spending really correlates to achievement or success in the video game is something like a warrior in full medieval armor is shot dead by a frail old man with a pistol. It's just there's an out-of-this-world difference in terms of the combat capability. Or you could think of it like bringing a gun to a knife fight, but for like power levels. A more recent game called Justice Online, one player named Lan Shan spent a whopping 150 million RMB on the game. In fact, that game even created a golden server for the ultra-rich spenders to play in. So this Lan Shan guy pioneered a professional salary system for his guild, and he famously said that he would give wages, essentially paying players of high levels, covering their server transfer fees, massive cash bonuses for winning championships and tournaments. And so in one instance, to boost the morale before a tournament, he purchased dozens of these Phoenix sedans, which are like horses that you ride on for 8,000 yuan each as a gifts for his guild members. So instead of giving them Rolexes, he gave them in-game horses. PDD, who is a former professional video game player, spent a rumored 10 million RMB in Justice Online, the same game that this guy just dropped 150 million. But the official response from the game developer was that he only dropped 500,000 RMB. The reason why I'm not giving you them in USD is because these numbers, they sound like it's a lot, right? Well, it is a lot for a Chinese person. Here's a good, I would say a pretty good comparison, but you be the judge. Making 500,000 RMB a year in China means you're either like, say, the legal counsel for a major corporation, or you're the general manager for an up-and-coming AI company, or you're like the chief engineering for a certain brand, okay? So think of how you well with that number, but that's literally somebody's yearly salary working in an industry that actually benefits people dropped on a video game. Now, China overall has around 670 million gamers, which is more than half of its population, in spreading out through different platforms, mobile games being one of the most popular. And the market in China is projected to generate around 138 billion USD in 2025. And that is the largest gaming market on the planet by a significant margin. Chinese players have access also to a unique genre, not so popular until recently, which is called the wuxia MMO genre. And this genre is one where you can kind of consider to be the equivalent of the Lord of the Ring or the World of Warcraft series, that type of mythic, pretty cool stuff, but like Chinese mythology. And that's where it's the genre that's been capitalizing or at the forefront of this free-to-play model, but pay-to-win fan base, right? Now, just because of the raw size of the market or the games themselves, that's not necessarily the main part of the story. It's really the culture around spend to play. Now, China's mobile gaming industry, people average a revenue per person at roughly $124 per person per year. Okay, so a single person works out on average to spend around $124. You might be thinking to yourself, like, I've never paid more than like $5 for a game, or if you own an Xbox or PlayStation, you might have bought a game for $80 and that was it. But that's not as sounding in terms of how ridiculous that number is until you compare it to what people do in the US, okay? United States, with a far higher average income, sits at about $60 per person per year. So it's more than half. In China, they're extracting more than half or more than double per player than the wealthiest large consumer market in the world, from a country where the average urban wage is like a fraction, not even, I would say, of American salaries. So you're thinking like this, right? They're less than half or maybe even a quarter of the spending power, yet they're spending double the amount of money per person who played the video game on that particular video game. Okay, so obviously something in the design of these games is pulling money out of people's pockets, and it's at a rate that defies the income gap. So that's where, it's a culture thing, right? To understand how this works, you first kind of have to understand the hierarchy of player bases. So in the West, we call players who spend a lot of money to keep the game free, quote unquote free, as the whales, right? They're essentially the 20% or the 10% or even maybe the 5% of the player base, but they might actually be around 60 to 70% of the game's economy. Okay, so Chinese gaming culture has its own similar vocabulary. It's called kejin. It's actually a translation that's mistyped from Japanese, which the term is kakin, meaning charging fees, but somehow that turned into a Chinese term, which basically means kryptonite for spending gold, or gold kryptonites. But the actual term, it just means spending money. And Chinese whales are referred to as Tuhaos, which are basically translated to meaning that these are rich people who have no class, as in no, like they didn't come from old money, right? Or they're not even new money, but they're just like people, say, from the countryside that got rich, doesn't have a lot of education and whatnot. Then there's also tiers to this. There's like the God tier Tuhaos, who are like millionaires, billionaires, who actually spend so much money that you will never even reach that level. And then you have slightly richer pay-to-win players who are just called the regular Tuhaos. One game where this was kind of making rounds because it was just so popular at the time, something called Dungeon Fighter Online. And this is a popular video game in China because there's a top streamer who regularly would spend tens of thousands of dollars on enhancing the character's items to this insane number, which is all by chance, right? So if you fail it, it will break and then you have to start all over again. So you basically just keep spending gold, which you buy with real money, to keep enhancing it until you reach that number. And so it basically, what it does is it allows the players to complete missions faster or extremely fast. And it got to a point where the players referred to the Chinese server as a unique server because compared to the Korean and the global release or the Japanese release, the amount of players who spent money to enhance their items has basically blown the power level off the chart.
就剩这一个了。
大不了再上个18是吧？我呀！
And one aspect that really fostered this at the same time as spending is the streaming culture. Like I mentioned, that live streamer is so popular. People love watching his reaction to, going up to a certain number or percentage, whatnot.
你说1个亿不行，我的这号花了，应该是2个多了，应该是2个多，就我这个账号纯。
And live stream selling in China is already a big thing, right? But streamers can get rewards like big balloons, cash bonuses, big rockets, these gifts, which they can in turn exchange for money. But when it comes to video games, people in China also they don't watch it just for the game, but also like how ridiculous things are. And games really, they've been deeply integrated into many other platforms, like social media, for example. Honor of Kings, which is Tencent's flagship mobile game, it's connected directly to WeChat, which basically runs China's digital life. So your friends can see your collection, your rank, your achievements, and in other games, like these rare and expensive items are visible to everybody, right? So because you have so many people who play this game, the fan base for you is much bigger. If you play a game in the West and say you dropped, I don't know, $30,000 on this game, like who are you going to tell it to? Nobody cares. Like they're just think that you're weird for spending that money, or at least I think most people would. But then when you go to China, this turned the idea of spending into what essentially is a social event, right? I think it's from an optional sort of bonus to making you play better to effectively becoming something that's mandatory or compulsory. Because if you don't do it, like the nature of games in China is not that you are in it to play it, but rather you're in it to pay to play it, right? But it's just in a different way. And so with how competitive things are, stopping or not spending more is basically like giving up. And so you keep investing into it. And that's why they generate so much revenue in China. Researching this, I found something very interesting, which is a video game. It's a mobile game called Love in Deep Space. And it's a game that attracts many female gamers. In the data from March this year, it saw that the game generated in China alone, again, $30.5 million. Genshin Impact, another mobile game, gacha game, which basically you have to, I guess, buy a chance to get the characters. That alone in China also generated nearly the same amount of revenue as its global release. Okay, so HoYoverse, the company behind it, they don't really release the official player count, but knowing the fact that China obviously has a sheer population advantage, we can still kind of estimate the numbers. According to different model and data, here's how it works. China is still the dominant revenue driver for this game called Genshin Impact, despite not having the majority of the player base. It accounts for roughly 22% of the global downloads and yet contributes about 55% of the total mobile revenue, which includes Android and iOS. If it's just iOS alone, then it's only 38.5%. But this implies that a significantly higher spending intensity among the Chinese players, which is around 2 to 2.5% of the global average per user. And that market combines large scale, obviously there's characters, strong monetization incentives, and a lot of things that are basically tied to the game's financial performance. And so you can see that seems to be like the perfect formula for you to get people in China to spend. But having said all this, it's a lot of information. I'll just leave you with one final comment, which is that while we're complaining that the games are costing $80 with season passes, Chinese gamers are asking, when can I drop another 1,000 on this game? All right, thank you very much for watching this episode of Unclassified China. I hope you loved the topic. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on this microtransaction culture in China. But also, if you have any other suggestions for a deep dive topic, let me know in the your thoughts in the comment as well. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.